Saki mbwembwana kwele mchele kwa kuku kumwaga. Sako na wapenda yatusema nitasikia.
Greetings, United Scholars. My name is Daniel Jump. I teach English at Greens Farms Academy, where Lila and Quinn used to go to school. They approached me a little while ago about possibly doing an introduction to poetry. They shared with me some of the poems that some of you have been writing, and they thought there might be some interest in a series of videos that would introduce certain techniques and forms of poetry and give y'all an opportunity to practice your poetry making skills. And that's the purpose of this little series. In this first video, I'll introduce myself, say a little bit about what we might do together, and a little bit about why. I should start from the jump by saying that when I was little, I did not think of myself as a poetry person. There's an old adage that you're either a novel person or a poetry person, and you're drawn to one form of literature rather than another. And when I was a younger kid, I would have definitely thought of myself as a novel person. Poetry didn't speak to me in the same way. It sort of felt like an exclusive club that I was on the outside of. The people who read and made poems were an intimidating crowd to me. And not only did I not know how to get access to this club, I didn't have a sense of what good it would do me if I could figure out a way to get in. And so it took me a while to find a taste and love for poetry. By the time I was in my 20s, I felt like I wanted to be in that club, and I spent a lot of time studying poetry in order to understand what the poets I admired were trying to say through their poems. And I spent the better part of my 20s in graduate school studying poetry as a scholar. And it wasn't really until my 30s that I started to become ambitious to write poems myself. So if you are someone who doesn't feel like poetry is your thing, know that you're in good company with me. And if you're somebody who's lucky enough to have discovered poetry already, know that you're well ahead of the game, well ahead of where I was at your age. Before we get started, I want to say something about my position, my situatedness as a teacher, and how that informs my my knowledge and my own blind spots. Most of the poets and authorities that I will cite in the course of this series are going to be American and European poets. So I want to acknowledge from the outset that I have a Eurocentric and a United States, in fact, centric view of poetry, and that is a limitation that I want to own up to. I don't know enough, nearly as much as I'd like to, about poetic traditions and forms outside of those traditions. So I will share what I know, but it is not everything. It's not even close to everything. And I know that I'm absolutely certain that there are poetic traditions and forms from Tanzania that are different than the ones that I will present to you. And I couldn't encourage you more to explore as fully as possible those traditions as well. Some of our greatest poets are those who pull from a bunch of different traditions and places in order to create their own poetry. The purpose of these videos will be idiosyncratic rather than systematic. I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I have found important and generative to know as I've grown as a poet. It's nothing more or less than that. Take what you want, leave the rest. If something is helpful, share it with others. If something is not helpful, don't sweat it. What I'll be doing is introducing practices and habits and methods and disciplines more than I'll be introducing knowledge or content. So think of this more as going to the poetry gym than sitting through a lecture, and know that I will always give you something to do or something to try or experiment at the end of these videos. So it's not just you listening to me talk, but you're trying some experiment in poetry in reaction to something that I've said. Most fields of human endeavor can be analyzed in levels. There's the how level, the what level, and the why level. And we'll be focusing a lot on the how in coming videos because poets tend to be really detail-oriented. They know that the placement of a comma or the choice of one word rather than another, so much hangs on it. So they like to think about technique, the how level. But there are the what and the why levels as well. And to start, let's think about those. To give a non-poetry example, one of the other things that I obsess about when I'm not obsessing about poetry is rock climbing. It's one of the things that I devote myself to most single-mindedly. Outside of work, it's the thing that I give most of my time to. And if we think of the how, the what, and the why levels, the what is sort of scaling a vertical wall, climbing it to the top. That's what I'm trying to do. That's the objective that I'm trying to complete. The how level is all sorts of techniques, moves, gear, ropes, all kinds of techniques and skills and habits that I need to bring to the objective of scaling that wall. But then finally there's the why. What is motivating me to do that? Especially such a seemingly bizarre thing as climbing a wall. And then I have to think about my motives. What's bringing me to that endeavor? And I can notice a couple of things about it. I started rock climbing because I wanted to become closer to my brother, and he was already a good rock climber. So that was one of the things that was motivating me. To learn how to more effectively manage my fear, practice courage, sort of in a low stakes situation. So maybe when the stakes are higher, I'd be ready. I'd have some bravery practiced and ready to go. That was part of it. I probably could find 3 or 4 other fundamental motivations that were moving me to do that thing, that what. So I think today we'll try to break down poetry into the what and the why a little bit. What are the objectives and why might you commit to writing a poem? What's the motive for writing? It's common to distinguish poetry from prose simply in this way. In prose, like the kind we read every day in the newspaper or a novel, the basic unit of meaning is the sentence, subject, predicate, period, at the end. In poetry, the basic unit of meaning is the line. Poets use sentences, but the basic unit of meaning is the line. The way words move across the page and end at a certain point. Stanzas break those lines up into parts. But that's not a very inspiring definition of poetry, not to me anyway, so I'll offer you a couple others. Start with a lofty one and move to some important but less lofty definitions. One comes from Shelley, the 19th century poet Percy Shelley, and he says that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Think about that for a second. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. That's quite a thought. If you commit to poetry, you might be able to write the laws of the world in ways that other people either don't notice or don't give you credit for. Here's another definition of poetry. This one comes from W.H. Auden, an English poet from the 20th century. He said simply, poetry is memorable speech. That one I like a lot. Poetry is memorable speech. If we want people to remember the things that we've said, if we want our words, our expressions, our ideas to have impact, at a basic level, they have to be memorable. And Auden's reminding us that the techniques of poetry, especially rhythm and meter, are a kind of mnemonic device. They make our speech memorable in a way that if we always spoke in prose, it might not be. Here's another definition of poetry. This one from W.H. Auden, a 20th century Irish poet. Of the argument with others, of our argument with others, we make rhetoric. Of the argument with ourselves, we make poetry. Of the argument with others, we make rhetoric. Of the argument with ourselves, we make poetry. Notice that what he's pointing out is if we already know what we want to say, if we're making an argument to another person, stating out a position, those things are really important to do. But that's rhetoric. That's making speeches. That is trying to persuade other people. Poetry, he says, is different. When we have an argument with ourselves, when we have a conflict within ourselves, when we are conflicted about something, when we don't really know where we stand, or when we have a complicated, tangled relationship with something or someone, and a complicated, entangled set of emotions that we need to think about and make vivid and maybe process for ourselves, that's when we write a poem. Thinking about those motives, I want to give us something to do here at the end. The first thing we'll need is something to write with. I have a notebook here that I'm very fond of. It's just the right size for me, and I have one of my favorite pens. Find a notebook. Writers need a notebook. Poets need a notebook to jot down their ideas. They need to do so on the fly because there's no telling when inspiration is going to come. So find yourself a notebook, or if you're lacking a notebook or prefer to write on a computer or on a phone. Commit a document to your poetry so you have everything in one place. The exercise I'm going to give you is to do some free writing and then build a poem out of that free writing. Free writing is, in my opinion, one of the most important practices that a poet or a writer of any kind really can practice on a regular basis. And what free writing is, at its most basic level, is trying to use your pen or your typing to create as accurate and unfiltered and uncensored a record of what is going on in your mind as possible. Most of us psychologically have a voice inside of us that regulates our behavior, helps us make decisions, tells us what is right and what is wrong, and that voice inside of us is very important. Without it, we couldn't be moral beings. But it is sometimes very disabling for a writer to listen to that voice too much. And what free writing tries to do is quiet that voice so that we write whatever comes to mind without thinking about what it means, without censoring ourselves. And one of the things, the best things we can do in order to get into that state is to keep our writing hand moving no matter what for a certain period of time. So I'm going to suggest this. Take 10 minutes to free write sometime this week. 10 minutes to transcribe what is going on in your mind at any given moment. And if there is nothing going on, or it feels like there isn't, write, I don't know what to write about. I don't know what to write about. I don't know what to write about. And I promise you, if you do that for about 30 seconds, things will start coming to you and you will write. Images, snippets of conversation you've overheard that you're thinking about, song lyrics, anything is fair game. Whatever's going on in your mind, write it down and do that for 10 minutes solid. At the end of 10 minutes, timer goes off, you stop, you put your pen down. Then reread what you have written and keep your ear, and use your ear more than any other sense. Use your ear to find the moments that are most beautiful or fascinating, individual phrases, words, moments in your writing, and put brackets around those. And aim to find about 5 or 6 or maybe 10 of those phrases and just bracket them. Then flip your notebook to a new sheet and put those phrases that you've bracketed from your free write into some kind of order. You can arrange them any way you like. You can put them in the order in which you wrote them the first time. You can rearrange them. Play with it. Maybe at some point you want to put a space between some of the lines that you've just written and some of the phrases that are to come. Go ahead and do that. You might have created a stanza, a division within your poem if you do that. Arrange those phrases, and at the end of that process, you will have written a poem. Then read that poem aloud to yourself. Listen to it without judging whether it is a good poem or not. Set that question aside. Just listen to it. Listen for its music, its rhythms, its beauty. And once you've done that, know that you might return to that poem to revise it, to make it a more perfect version of yourself. That might happen. You may never look at it again, and that's okay. You've just created a poem, which means the world has one more poem than it did before, which means the world is a better place than it was. And regardless of whether you come back to it or not, you are a little bit stronger as a poet. You're a little bit practiced. You're more fit in athletic terms. And the next time you come to your notebook to write a poem, you'll be a little bit more prepared to do your best. Thanks for listening. Try that. Bring your notebook to our next session. And it's been an honor and a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Bye.
Nanipaga moyo nikianza kulia chozi nafutia.